So welcome back. I hope you're suitably hydrated or caffeinated or whatever your fix is. We're going to start now on session 7. We have a very special speaker who has a session all to herself. I did have a chat with her before we started the session around actually what her title is, because she seems to be a very, very busy woman. So I would like to introduce Professor Lynne Bianchi. I will say one of her titles. She might introduce the rest of them. As Director of the Science and Engineering Education Research and Innovation Hub at the University of Manchester, who's going to be talking to us today about bringing together science and society. So Lynne, welcome.
Better get the clap beforehand, you might not give me one after. But yeah, I'll test anybody to beat that in terms of the number of words that you can have in a title, so don't worry about it. My name's Lynne, and that's probably all you need to know from here on in. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, so do connect. So yeah, a session all to myself, what a privilege, and thank you very much for enabling me to come home. I was born in Liverpool, I won't tell you how many years ago, but I lived here for 4 years before heading over to Manchester, where I've spent most of my my life. And then my career is developed from being a primary school teacher a long time ago now, it seems, working in North Manchester inner city primary schools, where I became very swiftly the PE coordinator. Now, anybody who knows me will pretty much know that I don't often break into a sweat, but I was under 24 with a pair of trainers. That's how I got that job. And then I swiftly came into academia, masters and PhD and whatever else, and I've stayed there ever since, working with in-service teachers across Greater Manchester, Yorkshire and across the UK and now internationally as well. So I'm going to draw on that experience to try and answer what is always the email says, will you come and talk? Here's your title. And then I'm like, what kind of things do you want to tell you? Anything you want from your experience. It's like, oh, okay, I'll just choose a few little bits. So having sat through some of the talks this morning, I've got to say the only one I really understood a little bit about was the brewery one, because that was in plain English. But I don't think you're going to get baffled with science through me, but hopefully I'll be able to inspire you to think about how you as an industry or as industry partners can connect mainly with schools and reducing society to our mainstream schooling situation, because that's where I spend most of my time. So look at this beautiful picture, and I often get stimulated by beautiful pictures, and I've used this one for years. I've never found one that beats it. So this makes me ask you, I look at this and I start to wonder, and it makes me wonder what you wonder about. It makes me wonder maybe what you were wondering about when you came across to Liverpool, or you stayed in Liverpool, when you grabbed your coffee and you looked at that amazing skyline this morning. What were your wonderings? What were your wonderings whilst you were listening to the different speakers today? Were they about the content? Were they about where you're going to have dinner tonight? What were you wondering about? Because this was a question that we started to play with probably about 15, possibly more years than that, when I started to say, what do children wonder about? So when you're thinking about bridging into the world of working with schools, working with teachers, and thinking about the next generation of people like you, I think it's possibly a really lovely question to say, well, what are they wondering about? And do we know what they'll bring into school with their wonderings? And this was a lovely space to be. So do you want to know what they kind of told me when I asked them that question? Am I going to get a yes? Yeah, okay. Yeah, all eyes on me. You can nod. Yeah, I will treat you like primary school children if you really want me to. Yeah. It's a long time since, but it works. Okay.
They all laughed at Christopher Columbus when he said the world was round. They all laughed when Edison recorded sound. They all laughed at Wilbur and his brother. They laughed at us and how. But ho, 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 who's got the last laugh? Har, 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 who's got the last laugh?
Okay, so you've seen a few there, and that music is played for a purpose. So this was a project that we did with a school, Bradshaw Halls Primary School in Stockport. Well, we've quite a few schools, but this teacher decided to have his year 6, so 10 and 11-year-olds, lying on the floor. They moved all the chairs. And he said, well, I have to create a space for wondering, don't I? He said, they don't just wonder, Lynne. You know, like we have to give them the environment in which to wonder. A lot of you talked about those kind of environments today, very posh ones by the looks of it as well. And he said, well, we need to stimulate that. So we played that music, and he said, well, the wonderings that you're going to share with me today are not going to be laughed at. We're going to be embracing them. And so he needed to create that sense of safety so that people wonder. Because at the end of the day, if you think about what you're doing in terms of innovation, it's the same kind of space. We have to culture that muscle around wondering. But you can see the questions that they've got here, and I won't dwell because I can talk about this project forever. But there's a lot of science in there. We didn't ask them to tell us about their science wonderings. We just said, what are you wondering about? There was one which was, who made school and why is it so rubbish? And being the governor of that school is a little bit concerning. There's a few about God and the universe because it was a Catholic school, so they were having that drilled down. There's a lovely one about bananas. Why do they go green when they get ripe? Interesting. And if you spotted the one about alcohol, it might be of interest to you. Yeah, what's alcohol got in it that makes you drink? What was his home or her home background like? You never know. But these wonderings were really important ways to try and hook into the curriculum. And I suppose what I'm asking and I'm suggesting today in terms of if you want to bridge and hook into science and science society or schools, you've got to start with where they're at. It doesn't really matter what you're wondering about because you've got to connect with the audience that you want to be connected with, isn't it? And if that's what they'll bring into school, how do we bridge from that to where you want them to be? And that's been part of the rest of my world in terms of looking at how we do that in a way that embraces the curriculum and jumps through every single hoop that there generally is out there. So that's what I'm going to sort of promote a little bit today in terms of really getting those wonderings and working those wonderings, work hard with those wonderings about how we move those forward. Now, a little bit of a less comical or less something not to smile at as much, you might say, are these things that you can see up here. These are the things that our teachers are wondering about. And if you read them, it's quite a hard list of 10 to read, especially when I had to write these about 25 years into my career, having dedicated myself to the improvement of science education across the UK. Still to be here in 2020 when we published this seminal report. I was actually told it was a professional risk to put this out. And I said, that's all right. I said, if people come and shoot me down, I'll be more than happy to, if I've got large swathes of teachers telling me that this isn't happening, because this is what we see on a day-to-day basis, and Ofsted, unfortunately, also concurred and have cited this as this is what the reality of primary science is like at the moment. And that's not because of the fault of teachers, and I'm going to do a huge shout-out. This is not a teacher-bashing situation. It is not their fault. It is a system fault. So the system at the moment makes science the lowest denominator in terms of the core subjects. Literacy and maths take every morning of every day, and science has been siloed into the humanities subject, and at best might get an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and a half. At worst, you might get about 40 minutes. Some terms, children won't learn science at all. And then I sit in a room like you and think, how are we going to get from there to you? Because we know by age 8, our research tells us if they haven't got an identity with science, they don't see themselves as scientists, they don't have role models for science, we're going nowhere with changing that post age 8. So if you've got young children, I know I've got 3, by age 8 now, they're much more like we were probably when we were about 14, when we were growing up. They're much more savvy. And so we need to do a lot more in that primary age phase, and that's obviously like what I'm coming to speak to you about today. So don't let this disappoint you too much. Use this as a point of wondering. Use this as a place of inspiration. And that's what teachers eventually told us. I wasn't thrown out of the profession. And a lot of people saying, thank God you wrote it down, Lynne, because now I'm not on my own. I can go to my head and say, we're not the only ones with these problems. The rest of the UK and beyond are the same. So let's use this and connect yourselves here in the biosector with the fascinating work that you do with addressing one of these 10 key issues. If you're going to go and do anything to bridge into schools, then use these and say, how can your work, your outreach, your work with schools, whatever it might be, help teachers address one of their gnarly problems? Because that's what they're wondering about. That's where you're going to make a difference. If you think the situation is better in secondary, I'd love to say it is. Well, it's a little bit better. We've got GCSEs that, beat people about with, and having my kids doing A-level chemistry, biology and maths at the moment. Not one today, there's one tomorrow. And so that's what drives the secondary sector. Lots and lots of facts, lots and lots of stuff to remember. So I suppose what I'm saying is primary and secondary schools are as academically driven as you are when you were speaking this morning. When engaging with them, you're not operating in a vacuum. There's a sector need in education just as much as there's a sector need within your environment, and finding those bridges and finding the things that are really going to matter and land, whether it's a child's wondering, teachers wondering at primary or secondary, is part of how we can make this bridge a much better bridge to work on. And really that your work then contributes into a continuum of practice and doesn't just drop in and drop out. It can actually influence at length. There's lots of, there's lots of inspiration. There's lots of inspiring people in science education, and I'm well networked into a lot of them. So if you want anybody else across the country, anywhere, please ask me, because I can probably tell you who's who. But unfortunately, we haven't got a huge amount of funding for research. So this was a report that we launched in March. This was the first primary science report funded by the Nuffield Foundation in about 20 years. EEF, which is the Education Endowment Fund, did a big scoping of research literature to try and pull it all together, and they didn't find any primary science education research because it's not been funded. So I'm here possibly with a begging bowl. I might not have said that before I saw, I suppose if we added up the goodie bag, budget out there, that actually is probably equivalent to what we'll get in education for pure research around pedagogy and pushing it forward. When we've lost people like the Wellcome Trust and things like that out of the sector, there just aren't funders to underpin an education sector that can then influence policy. And when you get to Bridget Phillipson and beyond, just telling her what other people have said isn't good enough. They want the stats, they want the statistical evidence. They're not going to shift the curriculum unless they've got that. And unfortunately, we've not got a sector investing in that educational research. So you get people doing bits and pieces as best we can and leveraging funding, which really helps us move things forward. And we are in a good position, or a better one than usual, you might say. The DFE is currently doing a revision of the national curriculum, thank goodness. It might see a bit of change. It might see it being brought into the 21st century. We've got more work going on with all schools having to have a sustainability action plan from 2025, which means that every school will not only have to think about itself as in terms of what it's doing in its infrastructure towards moving towards sustainability, but also about how it's encouraging children to think about sustainable practices through the context within which they learn. So there are lovely sort of hooks that we can pull on in terms of how and what we should engage people in learning, and how potentially you could bridge into that space with all of the work that you're doing. But I suppose the big question is, how on earth do you get through that door? How do you go from where you are today, if you've got an aspiration to bridge, then how do you get in? And my suggestion here really is to aim for the multiplier effect. Rather than creating new, dovetail into what's currently there, support what's currently there, uplift what's currently there, and magnify existing activity. There are lots of different ways that we can support people, scientists, engineers, to engage with schools through Royal Society partnership grants, where you become a science sponsor to a school who can then put in some financial funding to actually run a project over the course of a year. You could become a STEM governor, so there's a Governors for Schools network, there's multi-academy trust trustees, which are increasingly on the need for people who've just got really good analytical and analytical skills, can ask good questions. Those are sort of ways that you can connect. But I think the one thing that I would probably suggest that we don't do is that we all create a box of stuff and send it into school, because we don't need more boxes of stuff. There's websites that are festooned with resources for teachers. What teachers need is investment in them as people, professional development, in conferences just like this that I can assure you don't happen. But they'll always just really pushing at improving their professional standing. And giving them chance to collaborate, and potentially the next time you run one of these, invite some primary teachers, invite some secondary school teachers, invite some FE college, just to be in the space. Same with sixth form students, just allow them to be in and amongst you. It will invigorate what you do, it will support the way that you communicate with them, it will support them to be inspired that there's a science out there that is very close to where they're at. So over the past 10 years, well, I suppose what you're going to hear, hopefully, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, is the Great Science Share for Schools, which culminates next week. So I will be shooting off after this because we're rushing about to get this launched. So Great Science Share started 10 years ago. It's now an internationally global campaign with UNESCO support. This was just why wondering one day, can we have a global campaign that supports the profile of primary science, asking children to ask, investigate and share a scientific question. It's not rocket science, but it's been extremely powerful, and I can promise you that number's changed, and it begins with the number 8 this year, which we're absolutely really delighted with. So let me tell you a little bit more about Great Science Share, because when I say maybe go through the multiplier effect, then maybe this is something that you might want to support. So Great Science Share is focused on 5 to 14-year-olds, and it gets them, as I say, to be the science communicators, to be the people who are pretty much doing what you're doing today, but to doing it to peers, so peer-to-peer learning. It is a fantastic Trojan horse to enable teachers to understand what good primary science methodology looks like, what it means to ask and investigate a question, what that looks like, especially when only 5% of our teachers in the workforce have got science as a background. So we need to do it in a way that motivates and gets them to wonder. And it does raise the profile, and obviously at scale now across lots of different countries. And so anyone in Manchester, I know we've got quite a lot around the corner, MMU, Salford, we ran one at Salford last year, but if you want to come along Tuesday afternoon between 12 and 3, there'll be hundreds of children at Manchester University sharing their science, but there's also many happening right across the UK, RHS, Bridgewater, Colchester Zoo, different hospital schools, Great Ormond Street, they're all over the place. It's a very easy way to get going. BASF, chemical company in Stockport, hosting one in their space. You can host one, potentially, don't know where you are, but these things are easy to do if you just take them the formula and run them through. If you're looking to engage with science within schools, this is also a great place for you to get the kind of resources that support you to look purposeful and know, like you know what you're doing. It's all free, just access resources that link to the curriculum and enable you to speak with more confidence when you're encouraging children to connect with your science. I want to just draw attention before I finish to how your sector, and I did have to do a bit of Googling about what it meant to be in the biotech industry despite being in the faculty, healthcare, agriculture, environmental management, all of your areas are just so wonderful, such wonderful context to take our curriculum and make it more purposeful. But you don't need to do that. So what I've brought along is some books. You're very welcome to take them, especially if you've got any children. Do take them. Don't buy them on Amazon. I've saved you about £100 there. There you go. But I wanted to. There's some little spinners on your table as well. And the key message, what I want to say here is, we can support you. Use people like us. There's not many of us around, but we're here for you, especially in Greater Manchester, to translate your work into a palatable form, curriculum linked for different age groups. And that's our pedagogy. That's my expertise. That's what I do. You don't need, I'm not going to ask you to do that. That's what I've spent all my career doing. And just to give you an example of what that might mean, I want to just focus in on Izzy Jones. So Izzy, or if you know her, this is Jess Boland. This was the Quantum project. On the way into work this morning, I was listening to Quantum's done some great strides this morning, hasn't it? And they're all talking about what's gone on in Quantum. And I thought, great, I'm going to get this back out. So we published this with Quantum, the EPSRC Quantum Name Project last year, and it's still running really beautifully. And something in your sector could do similar. So the quantum scientist said, what we really need, Lynne, is for all 6-year-olds to know what quantum physics is. And I said, really? Okay. And I've had another one come to me, Diodes, semiconductor company, and they said, we need 6-year-olds to know how a semiconductor works. Interesting. How a semiconductor works. 6. Really? Okay. Because our national curriculum doesn't ask us to do that. And that's not a gnarly problem that a teacher's got. And it's really not a piece of conceptual understanding that's appropriate at that age. So that's the sort of little conversation that we very smilingly have. And then say, but what we will do for you is we'll spend a little bit of time with you and we will find the sweet spot. We will find the essential experience that allows us to teach quantum physics and to teach what semiconductor is, but in the simplest form that can model down to a 5 to 7-year-old, 7 to 11-year-old, or 11 to 14-year-old. And that turned into this, which is on your table. It's a spinner. And what we found with the quantum scientists is as we talked and talked and talked, they just kept talking to me about atoms. And I said, we're not allowed to talk about atoms. We don't talk about atoms at primary. Tell me what you're trying to do. And they said, we're trying to get these atoms to work in a way which is the best form of themselves. And we manipulate the environment within which the atoms work. And then that's the variable. We change the control variables. And I went, okay. We have to teach variables, we have to teach control variables at primary. Great, here we go. So children spinning lots of little things and they'll floating them down, and we control the environment around them, and we explain that by controlling the environment, the wind, the space, whatever's around them, this will perform in the best way possible to hit a target. And within the story it also tells about a neurodivergent young lady who also needs to find her space in the world when the world feels like the environment around her isn't helping her to be her best. So it's working on lots of different levels. And we found the sweet spot. EPSRC, I'm told, I don't know if anyone's in the room, we're quite happy about this. And we got to that point where we bridged between science and society. We could do the same for you. I don't know what it would be. Whether it's brewing, it could be. Don't know. We do stuff on mushrooms. We need to talk with children. The Linnean Society are very passionate about mushrooms. Maybe that's the one. But finding these essential experiences and taking your concepts down to the right level. It's not a baby level. It's just the right level for those young people, and to connect with their wonderings is where the magic happens. So the formula is, we think, it seems simple at the end. This seems so simple, it takes quite a lot to get to, but we get there in the end. And for the people who then say, I will, just 1 minute, the people who say, oh, too much hard work, another thing to do. Well, I'm going to play you this, and then I will stop, but it is inspirational, and hopefully it'll just bring something together. This was a teacher, it was a lady who was going out to a school in Nepal. She took this and she said it wasn't too difficult. This is the great science share happening in Nepal by a non-science subject specialist making a difference across the world to young people who eventually might be the people who are sitting in front of me right now.
It was very heavy, so it dropped faster.
It was very heavy, so it dropped faster. Okay, so you're trying with a small one now. Okay.
Smaller than smaller.
Okay.
I'm going to whiz it on. It was a lovely video to watch. But it isn't too much effort. It starts with something quite small, but it starts with a commitment to making a difference. So for me, if you want to do anything in the biosector, hang on, let me go back, I've lost it. Find that sweet spot, find the relevance. Somebody's going to have to sort out the slides. Thank you very much for having me here. Sorry. There you go. And I will leave these, anyone take them. Like I say, one's about change over time in semiconductors and the other one's about quantum physics, but 5 to 14. All right.
Thanks very much, Lynne. I'm going to take the one about quantum world.
Yeah. And if they all run out, you can get them on Amazon for £10.
That was a really inspirational talk. Are there any questions? I mean, I could talk to Lynne for hours, actually, but we don't really have time. Okay, we'll take one over there.
Go back up here.
Not a question, is kind of like a suggestion.
So it's a suggestion, not a question.
Well, maybe it's a question at the same time as a suggestion. Your age is that a 5-year-old?
I do, yeah.
I got a 3-year-old that is absolutely like crazy. When I say come and play science, it just makes him maybe shape foam from her dad and maybe some coloring, like from cake coloring.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you thought about like nurseries as well? Like lower than 5-year-old?
Yeah. Thought about lots of things. We could go. I've had the same question asked of me about what I got about beyond age 14. Early years has actually got some of the best practice that is currently out there. The problem is bridging between early years and age 5 when everything just falls off the cliff. So there are specialists in early years, and they have and can adapt the resources that we've got. But when we want mass engagement, I've got to go in at mainstream. I've got to go in at entitlement for every single child. Not every single child go. So I'm not saying it's not important. It can be adapted, and purposeful play is very much what they do so well. So keep doing those things. Keep talking and keep just putting the washing out, messing about in puddles, talking about leaves turning colour, all of those kind of things, and embrace that. But you're not wrong. It's just at the end of the day, you've got to put your effort somewhere. And yeah. All right.
Thanks
Anyone
very
else?
much.
Yeah.
Are you going to be around over
I'm going to shoot off on that, but I'm really pleased if anyone gets in touch. And,
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, absolutely the way. And please come along next week if anybody's in Greater Manchester and you want to come and see Great Science Share for sure. All right.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.